great to be here, and I'd like to introduce you to the panel who are going to tackle some very interesting scenarios. It'll be ladies first. So the lady in red, Virginia Ng, who's a former senior marketing director with KFC. And then dressed in black, we have Susanna Choi, who is APAC CEO for PhD. And the agent provocateur, Darren Woolley, who is CEO for Trinity P3. He's going to be putting a number of scenarios to our marketing and agency experts here and challenging them with their response, maybe being kind, but probably not, to see what view they have. I mean, when you think about what's been going on in the industry, I mean, it's forever changing and moving forward. And then you mix that up with the challenges that you face with the Western view, the different cultural aspects within the Asia-Pac region. It'll be really interesting to see what you think about these scenarios and whether it's appropriate or whether it's not. So we think we're going to introduce a new language into the client and agency relationship, which is a this, which is this is good, we agree with this, or it's not good. And you can use this in the future. You know, is the budget good? I'm sure you'll find lots of uses for this. So I think without ado, let's get on with the scenarios. We've got about 5 to go through, and we only have a total of about 40-odd minutes more to do that. So we'll go through a scenario, it'll be debated, and then I'm going to throw it open to you guys to see if you have any final questions or views that you would like to add in to that scenario, and then we're going to vote. So it's an interactive session, okay? So you can't fall asleep. Hopefully the lights will be up bright enough later on that I can see you. So without further ado,
do you want to go forward?
Flick through to the first scenario.
So these scenarios are actually true to life. They come from actual interactions that we've worked on. Unfortunately, the laws of slander and defamation have meant that we have to take the names and the identities out to protect the guilty. The first one is called the charitable markup. And it was actually a marketer had a charity that was part of their strategy, that they were supporting this through their marketing and corporate strategy, but found themselves at a fundraising event unable to make the donation that they wanted to make to the charity. So they turned to the agency CEO and asked if they would make the $50,000 donation on their behalf, which the agency CEO agreed to. Later that month, a bill turned up for the $50,000 along with the 10% commission markup and the 7.5% service fee, which the marketer was very disappointed about. So to you, Virginia, would you be disappointed if you asked the agency to do this and it came with a markup, even though it's part of their contract?
I would be very disappointed because I just assumed that my agency should be in love with me, that he'll be, you know, willing to help me out in whatever circumstances, but no. It's a charity. I was stuck. This kind gentleman, whom I assume I had a good working relationship with, he agreed to foot the bill and save me from my embarrassment. So I think it's okay, it's acceptable to pay the 7.5% service fee, but not the 10%, because 10% to me is of actual work done. In this case, he probably got his finance department to issue a check, etc. There was no real creative work done. So, yeah.
Because Susanna, we hear all the time about procurement and the negotiations between marketers and their agencies, constantly putting the pressure down. So as an agency, if you have an opportunity to add the agreed markup to the charge, do you think you should take it, or is it discretionary?
I don't think it should be discretionary or not, because most of the service fees is crafted in the scope of work, but I would be surprised why procurement is not in the middle of this while we're having a conversation. You're right, I think commission is unacceptable or unnecessary, and it's also a charity. So the company themselves would have gotten a lot of tax relief from that as well. So that's depending on the market or not. So
that's right. Yeah. I mean, I could justify it to the finance department to pay the 7.5%. Because we would get some form of tax relief.
I wouldn't
we could
think
offset
that an agency should charge you that, should they? Should they?
This is a really embarrassing situation because you're there at a charity gala, charity ball. In fact, it's strange that if I were there, that I don't have the money to put through the donation.
Yeah.
And the agency actually helped me out
I would think so.
of that.
Yeah.
And I assume just from this, it was a quick phone call, like I don't have the money now. Could you help me out? So.
Because the other thing is that we hear about payment terms. I mean, this $50,000 may take 90 days to get paid.
True.
So 7.5% is completely reasonable.
I would think so. Of course, as a client, I would think if the agency does it out of love, it's wonderful. But let's be reasonable. He helped me out of a really potentially embarrassing situation. And in fact, if I ask the finance department for this, the finance guy should have been responsible in getting the check ready for me. And he was not on the ball, as you say, here in Singapore. So.
But I would also think that the relationship between the agency and the client should have already be there, and it wouldn't need it to be asked as a favor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Very interesting. Has anyone else got any? They're agreeing very much together. Which is obviously they already have a very good
For
relationship.
this case.
Fabulous. Only in this case. We'll see what happens later on. Any other views? Do you think that the agency should just do this out of the kindness of the heart, not charge a handling fee, not charge commission, accept probably a 90-day payment terms and be out of pocket for that period of time, maybe completely destroy the percentage efficiency of the business? Say maybe their income's only $500,000 in revenue, and suddenly there's 10% more on top, which is going through without any commission. So if they're a group-owned agency, the efficiency of that account is going to look worse, right? Because there's this free cash flow going through. Is that acceptable or not? What do you think? Any views?
I think a service fee is reasonable because there's people who are going through finance department doing the work, there's collection and all that stuff. Whether it's 7.5 or 17.5, that is up to the client and the agency to agree on. But I certainly think a fee or a handling fee would be what I call it is reasonable. But that should be agreed prior to receiving that surprise in your invoice and stuff like that. So in our business, it's happened to us before where a client says, hey, I need to, it usually has to do with buying something, and they say, but you are the certified vendor and the other vendor isn't, I'll pay you and you pay them. Same scenario. We say, hey, we'll charge 5% fee.
Yeah.
Because respective finance department works have to do work.
Certainly at 17.5%, it's around the same as a credit card.
That's a good perspective.
That's one way of looking at it. Any other thoughts over centre there?
Yeah.
And I'll get to you. Okay, you're ready to go. Okay.
Yeah. So, yes, 7.5%. 10% is a definite no-go. To even start a marketing activity without even being funded by it, it's a big negligence from the marketer's side. So that's not part of the case study here. So obviously, I do not agree with the 10% as well as the 7.5%. If you are a creative agency, you've got to think creatively as well, and you've got to strategically pick up the IOU card from the client and say, well, I helped you out. So there's always, I expect you to scratch my back in the future. So that is even more strategic, and you win the hearts of the customer. He's not going to be poached by anybody else. That's what you should have done. And first of all, the marketer shouldn't have even asked, because if this scenario was in Singapore, like what you said, just take a personal loan and expense it to the company. $50,000 is nothing.
So the one last question from the centre there.
I was actually surprised they got to bill it back at all. Our experience as an agency is quite often the clients will, I guess, ask you to contribute to charitable causes that they're connected with. And it's kind of part of the quid pro quo of the fees they give you, you'll occasionally kick back in a charitable way. So I think if that had been us, we would have charged maybe 25,000 or something, and the other 25 would have been seen as contributing and sort of being on the side of the client. That might be us.
Right.
Okay, we put it to the vote?
We're going to put it to the vote now, okay? So I'll need to see your arms, either thumbs up that it's acceptable to have this scenario of 10% plus 7.5%, or thumbs down if you think that it should be any range from down to 10, down to 7.5, or even lower. So thumbs up or thumbs down? What are we seeing here? We're seeing a pretty much almost unanimous.
Unacceptable.
I see a couple saying it's acceptable, but the vast majority is unacceptable. Thank you very much for that vote. Now we'll move on to scenario number 2.
Okay, so scenario 2, there's an award-winning executive creative director at a major network agency who seems to have a favourite production company where they send most of their clients' work to be produced. As the ECD explains to his clients, they have the best directors in the region who really understand my creative vision and deliver my creative vision. The fact is that around 80% of all of the agency's production work has gone through there, which has amounted to about 12 million US to date. While the productions are expensive, the clients aren't complaining about the quality of the productions, they're complaining about the price of the productions. And that's why we were asked to look at this, and our investigations found that the ECD and his brother were silent partners in the production company. So I'll start with Susanna. Mm-hmm. Acceptable or not?
First of all, I ask which country is this happening in? Secondly, well, it's very common in some countries. But joking aside, I also think that why would the creative director have a side company that he hasn't declared? Because that's usually, normally, it's very typical that you must declare your side business if you're working, especially if it's conflict of interest or anything related to the industry, and that's a mandatory for if he is, or he or she is an ECD, someone that's senior. But having said that, silent partners, they might probably not show up and may not have declared it. So I think not being transparent with the client is absolutely unfair for the client, and that should not happen at all. So, unless the agency also doesn't know, which I need to now question.
Okay, so to provide some more information, the ECD, when confronted with this, said, oh, the agency knows about it, and in actual fact, it was part of an unwritten agreement for them to be able to supplement their income because the agency was unable to pay them the amount that they wanted. So from the ECD's point of view, it was very transparent. No one had told any of the clients.
Transparent to everyone else except the client.
Yeah.
That's obviously not acceptable.
And I think
and the ethics.
Yeah, the
How would you feel, Virginia?
Yeah,
I would feel quite disgusted.
Right.
I mean, it's actually there's accountability on two sides. I think as a marketeer, we are custodians of the money or the funds that we manage. So the marketeer should always ask for alternatives. At least you know that your money is whatever you pay for is being justified. You feel justified in that. And we would always like to work with somebody whom we can trust. You know, nobody's perfect all the time, but please come clean. You know, and I would have appreciated if the agency came up to me and said, look, Virg, this is what happened. We have this agency here. By all means, we'll pit them, this production company, pit them next to 2 other production companies. You be the judge. Mm-hmm. And perhaps good quality work may have won, you know. But this is integrity, lack of integrity on the part of the agency.
Right, let's throw this out to the audience, see what people think about this. Do you think this is acceptable behaviour, not acceptable? Is it acceptable in some countries, not in others? We're not voting quite yet, but has anyone got any personal experiences they'd like to add to the
No
flavour
names.
of this? Yeah,
No
yeah, you don't- yeah. I'm sure we've all come across similar things to this in many different countries around the world, and it's always a challenge. But I'm sure you've got some personal experiences too. Maybe you don't want to share them, but any thoughts from anyone? Is there a microphone, lady over here?
Hi,
Hi.
I work for Unilever, and I look after marketing procurement. And I find it quite interesting because Unilever have very strong ethical and corporate responsibilities. All of our teams have to sign, and we expect our agencies to sign them as well.
Yep.
So I find it very naive, actually, that the agency would go and do this. I hope it wasn't with large multinationals, because we actually have to uphold certain standards, and the brand will suffer if we don't uphold those standards, and we expect the same of our partners.
This would be in direct contravention of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, for example.
Well, I don't know what the regulatory requirements, and I don't know what the regulations would say in each of the countries, and I don't know which country this was in, and so I can't comment on that. But what I would say is, from a company standpoint, it's unacceptable. Whilst we have our employees, we hold them to certain standards, we hold our suppliers to certain standards, and this doesn't fit within those standards.
Right. Does anyone think it is okay? Sorry.
No, I don't think it's okay. Actually, what really concerns me about this scenario and the previous one is about the lack of professionalism in our industry. In the first one, the problem's with the marketer, not the client. Agencies are not banks. And the abuse of the agency-client relationship is a real problem in the first one and in this one. And I completely agree with what you're saying. There are very, very clear corporate guidelines which we, as agencies and clients, have to thank our procurement colleagues for, which we don't always say, for embodying this. And I've worked on both the client and agency side of the fence. And the lack of professionalism here concerns me about both of these scenarios.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're ready to vote on this one now. So,
Got to shout it out as well, right?
Acceptable?
is anyone who
or
thinks
not?
it is acceptable? No, it's definitely unacceptable.
All right.
Okay, let's move on to the next scenario.
Well, this one's probably more about the marketers than the agency, because in this case, it's an advertiser approached their media agency. This is not a multinational. This is actually quite a large private company, family business, and the advertiser approached the media agency to buy what was clearly a premium package of out-of-home media. It would represent a significant part of that quarter's media spend to actually buy, but across the year it was relatively small. It would also be quite a shift in their media strategy, so there's a potential that this could stand out, except that what came to light was that confidentially the advertiser shared that this particular media package came with a sales incentive, which was 2 tickets to the Cannes Advertising Festival, including airfare, accommodation and entry tickets, and that they would like the media agency to recommend this package and then to organise for them to win it as Advertiser of the Month, as a way of being able to enjoy the benefits of this particular sales package. So I won't start with you, Susanna. I'll start with Virginia.
You mean the agency doesn't know that I enjoy traveling, and they should have just
And
they
what's
should have
wrong
just
with
offered
going
it
to
to
the
me without me
Riviera,
asking.
the French Riviera.
You can come along as well.
Yes, buy 2 packages and have 4 tickets.
That's right. We can all
What a
go.
deal.
But seriously, I mean, this is clearly unacceptable. I mean, any respectable marketer would always put the brand first. I mean, what jumped out at me when I first read this was that it would be a shift in the media strategy, and that could hurt the brand. I mean, it's obviously not well thought through. So we always put the brand at the center of everything, and we need to protect it. So that's one, which the marketer has done the wrong thing. And secondly, this is like, you know, it's shameless, you know, to do something like that. It's very, very unethical. So, no.
Okay, so the agency came to us to ask us how to deal with this because they felt uncomfortable with it. And when we went back to the marketer said they are responsible for the use of the budget.
Yeah.
So their perspective is that it was up to them how that budget was actually invested and they would be accountable to it.
The agency is also, when we work with agencies, we also entrust them with the brand. We don't at least for where I used to work with, we don't say that you're the agency, you just listen to everything I say. So they are as much a custodian as us. So I think it's the agency's role to raise it to the client, and I don't know which level this client is at. Is there somebody more?
No, head of the, you know, they were in charge of the budget.
Right, but is there somebody more senior that
The owner of the business.
okay, because clearly
You would have just had a direct deal. Why go through the agency? Doesn't have to pay the agency fee.
correct. You could have just asked the media owner directly.
No.
Okay, so
Because-
Susanna, I mean, in media, there's still lots of these incentives. I mean, every time the Olympics are on, the broadcast partners have lots of trips for as incentives for good advertisers to go to the Olympics or.
Well, I think in this scenario, it would probably be a little unrealistic nowadays because most of the agencies are tagged onto very specific KPIs in terms of return for each individual media placement. So by channel and also by placement itself. So because of the rigor in the measurement per se, that if you're an agency and you have a year KPI that you have to produce in order to attach, like because it's, some of the fee structure is performance-based, and if you're risking the overall performance of your media, buying something that's outside the strategy, then it will probably not deliver and which will affect the greater fee of your compensation. So I think this might be something that wouldn't probably happen today.
So recommending a package that includes entertainment, taking a Olympics package. What's the difference between the advertiser asking for that and the agency recommending it?
I think a lot of these incentives, I guess they're called, right? A lot of them are discussed outside without third-party involvement nowadays. Like if that is what the media owner or a committee wants to throw in to sweeten their deal, then they usually go through directly with the client. In this scenario, where it's a private company and is the owner of the company, then by right he can control what he wants to do with his money.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
And I think you should be concerned.
But that's got to be a black and white, and it's got to be not against the contract that the agency has signed with
And
the
I think,
owner.
like what Susanna, what you mentioned, the agency is held accountable for the strategies that they recommend.
Yeah.
So if the agency were to go ahead with the client, it's basically going against its beliefs and its strategies that they presented right at year end, right in front of the year. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So let's open this one up a bit further, because I think there's another little nutty issue that's sitting back here. Like if you had the conscience of procurement or commercial behind you. So I was thinking in my role when I was marketing director with Mars, a lot of stuff used to come our way in terms of opportunities and offers, and the rule was very straightforward. If there was a prize of going to Cannes or something, then that would go into as an option for all employees, all associates of Mars would have the option to have that. It couldn't be channeled to a specific individual because then that starts to sort of cross over a line, whether it's an acceptable media package or not. So I'd be interested to see what you think about this. Any thoughts, anybody? Anyone like to? think it's okay? Anyone think it's okay to have that little
But
package
most
attached?
international clients also have a corporate gratuity clause or a policy
Yeah.
where it's capped anyway, even with lunch and normal
Yeah.
entertainment.
Sure.
So that's also on the marketer's side where there is a policy against for many clients now.
Yeah, not here.
Actually, in this case, it's what's most troubling is that it's off strategy, and
No,
this
a shift in strategy.
shift in strategy. Honestly, this comes in as a sales incentive, but we've all had lunches, dinners, which could also, depending on the degree, of it, could also be lumped into this area. But this is more in your face, as in it's slightly off strategy, but it's the marketer who's asking for it.
Yeah.
Then
It goes to the motivation. What was the motivation of the marketer that they want to appear to keep it quiet?
yes,
Because if it wasn't unacceptable, why wouldn't they be open about it? But is the actual behaviour, like the actual concept of marketers enjoying incentives offered by the media to buy a particular media package unacceptable?
Any thoughts? Probably, yes?
I think it's about all companies, whichever side of the fence that you're on, whether you're the client or you're the agency, that you should be accountable for your actions. And most companies should be keeping record of, and written record, of all activity that they undergo. So the fact that there's even this sense of behind the scenes, under the table, is not a really particularly pretty picture. Any company should be able to present its records and show a paper trail in email electronic form of conversation that's been had with the client. And if they can't do that, and there's then something untoward that then appears later, well, how is someone going to explain that? So I don't care whether you're a bank or you're a big corporation or you're an agency. I mean, you should still be accountable for your actions, and they should overall be honest.
In the centre over there, the back?
I just think the whole sort of value-based remuneration is a topic that we're skirting around at the moment. And I think, to be honest, I think the marketer should be motivated by their company to perform better. And if the channel, allows them to perform better, then, you should get those spoils in the form of bonuses or whatever from your company. You shouldn't be able to be bought anywhere for any number. And if you are, it's completely fraudulent. And the last three questions have been pretty gross, to be honest. So I'm hoping it gets a lot better from here.
Real life, it is gross.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a good reminder of the fact that this gross stuff happens. And often the culture of that individual who thinks it's okay to roll a sweetener for them into the package and do that. It's a real life scenario, and it's the kind of stuff that certainly face in different Asian markets where there are sometimes different attitudes, and it's evolving in a different way. Take your point completely. Anybody else like to add any comments? Who on the left here?
No, I'm not going to say it's all right. What I wanted to say was I've been in several trainings related to this topic, and I think what really stood out to me was recognizing who the key stakeholders of the company are. So if it's a privately held company, they're the shareholders, right? If it's a company in the pharmaceutical space, it's consumers and patients. And so really having that focus on who are my key stakeholders, and each of the decisions that I'm taking, are they benefiting my stakeholders? So in this case, again, if it was privately held company, then I would say, of course not. But maybe it's my own company, I own it. And then I have to see who are my stakeholders. Probably I am one of the stakeholders. Maybe the answer could change.
So you could probably make a decision as a stakeholder or no. You might say, well, I'll just pay for the ticket and go myself. I don't need it to be part of a media package. It's actually wrong for the brand. But yeah, no, I take your point. Okay, are we ready to vote on this one now?
Yep. I think we know what the answer is, but anyway. Acceptable. No, not. Oh, hang on.
It's pretty
Or half.
It's pretty unacceptable again.
But there's some dissenters. Okay.
Yeah, it's majority.
Okay, we'll
Still.
get on to number 4, which is the project pitch. So, and we hear about this all the time because there's lots of agencies obviously approaching marketers to get onto the roster, to get a project that they can start working on. And in this particular case, the marketer was being approached by an agency, so they decided to give the agency a brief to respond to a particular project. The agency, being incredibly enthusiastic, did a huge amount of work, working up different creative territories, executing it through lots of different expressions, did the creative presentation, the speculative presentation, and to a great reception, but then heard nothing for months. Every phone call, every email was left unreturned until one day they saw work very similar to the concepts they presented start to appear. And when they approached the company again, they were told, yes, thank you for participating in the pitch, but the work that's running was actually presented by our incumbent. So is this acceptable or not? Because we hear about this type of behaviour happening all the time. Speculative creative work, pitches are often done.
Who has experienced this in the audience? Who has? I think if you work for an agency, either heard of or experienced it.
Yeah, so, I mean, I can't imagine you, Virginia, ever doing this, but...
No.
You have to protect the whole of the client's industry now with your...
I mean, this, we can't pretend that it's not happening. Clearly, everybody, quite a few people have raised their hands. Under my watch, it hasn't happened. Usually when we get an agency to either come and pitch or talk to them about a job, I think firstly, it has to be clear as to what the timelines are, when I'm going to come back to you. It's clearly avoidance on the part of the marketeer, and that's not professional at all. And I think up front, we could have, or the person could have negotiated, like if I liked your idea, but maybe in terms of your setup, it's not, we're not comfortable, we're not confident about you executing it, could we agree up front on a certain fee to pay? Because certainly as, when I just started out in marketing, I have heard, that it was okay, this agency, we just tweak it a little bit and then it becomes our work. Yeah, but as you grow through the years and you see the amount of effort that an agency puts in behind a piece of work. I mean, it seems simple, but a lot of effort that's behind, then I think it's mutual respect that we should accord that. And it's not right, it's not ethical. And I'm not sure whether it's whether the client can be prosecuted here or can be fined, or I mean, I'm talking about Singapore, but I'm sure in other markets they're a bit more protective of the creative work, intellectual property, that in Singapore, I'm not sure.
One of the issues here is the fact that clearly there was no rigorous process for a tender. But even then, if there was a rigorous process and there was an RFP put in place, almost every RFP document that I've seen has a clause which says that the company reserves the right to not make a decision or select a vendor from this process, because they have to have the option of going through the process and not actually awarding the business to someone.
Yep.
So in doing that, they actually validate this behaviour because they may have run a tender and decided not to use that concept because someone else presented something very similar.
Right. I mean, they don't have to switch agencies. They can stick with the incumbent, but I think it's only professional and ethical that you don't reproduce work that's not yours.
But that would be a legal case around copyright and intellectual property, because they could prove the work was delivered on a particular
and usually it's
day.
it should be a long and arduous process that maybe the agency, and I think it's a new, I don't know, I'm just assuming it's perhaps a new agency or something. they may not want to go through that process and sour the name.
Well, Susanna, isn't one of the problems that the agencies can be so enthusiastic to get a new business opportunity that they will run into these examples blind, with a blind enthusiasm?
I think for when you're not very seasoned, then for quite a new, like you say, relatively newer agency, but it is a very typical example of client bullying as well, because usually you're right, in any pitch scenario, when we agree to move forward and participate in an RFP, for example, there would be a clause that says that there will be no fee for this pitch being awarded. There may be a consequence of, or the result of rewarded, so no agency being signed for it, they wouldn't switch. They have all these caveats on the client side, but at the same time, I think as an industry, the agency, the incumbent who executed also was at fault for accepting somebody else's idea, because if you were a proud agency, you wouldn't even entertain the idea of using another creative's concept. That's just not what you do ethically.
You're making that assumption because they may have actually produced the same concept to the same brief.
Could be.
Yeah.
They may have actually
They may
done
have
that.
just taken it wholesale and got somebody to just make minor adaptations.
This is why, first of all, copyright law is terrific law, except that it costs potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars to prosecute or defend.
Exactly.
Which is why very few people do it, especially in advertising.
Even if it were prosecutable, I mean, you don't hear.
No,
would never happen.
No,
you know,
yeah, it's very difficult to prove, I would assume. But then if they had meetings afterwards and the client actually expressed that they liked and accepted the concept, then it's hard to get away with that one.
Yeah.
I think it's time to open this one up to the floor now. So there's a number of interesting streams that are questionable in this, whether it be the marketer's actions, whether it be the incumbent agency if they did use someone else's work. So it'd be interesting to see what people think, having experienced this kind of thing themselves. And you know, if you'd worked hard on this work and you saw your stuff appearing, you know, how would you feel? How do you protect yourself? Do we have a microphone for this lady at the centre over here?
I think on every level this is disgraceful, but I think the onus is on agencies to make sure that we're not accepting of all of the caveats to Susanna Fitzpatrick's point that sit in an RFP, and that we've got the right to push back on that and protect our intellectual property. So I think the onus is on us to do that. I was involved many, many years ago in a situation in New Zealand where we were pitching for a piece of business, and the client quite clearly was in love with the work but wasn't perhaps in love with us as an agency, and we actually managed to agree post the pitch that the client wanted to take the work, and they paid us quite a substantial amount of money to go and use it. And I think as long as there's an honest dialogue around that, and I have to give great credit to the client in that situation. But I think we've got to protect our intellectual property, particularly when it comes to new business pitches, because this sort of stuff happens all the time. Having said that, I've just judged some young emerging talent awards over the last few days. All of the teams worked on the same brief, and the category, the areas that they all landed on was the same.
Yeah.
And I think that's also another challenge of how do you actually prove that that is specifically your work. So I think it's a very grey area in the industry, but I think we've got to protect our IP. And I think clients have to accept that from their agencies.
Julian?
Do you think it was, sorry, was, okay.
Yeah, in fact, I want to echo your opinion there. I think what's unacceptable is the agency's behaviour first. No agency should be doing that amount of work without actually having some sense of the engagement afterwards. I think that kind of behaviour is damaging for the industry as a whole.
Yeah.
I was actually involved in a similar scenario to this in the UK. What happened was that the company in question wanted the top B2B agencies in the UK at the time to pitch for them. Fortunately, this company had quite a bad reputation for running unethical pitch processes. So we got in touch with one of the industry bodies, and what we did with them was that we all submitted our pitch work to that independent body who held it and had obviously the overview of if we'd all come up with the same idea at the same time. They were an independent third party who could say it's impossible to know where this idea came from. You have to make your decision based on other criteria, not just the creative. They also engaged a lawyer on our behalf to help us understand what the situation might be afterwards. And they also negotiated with the company in question about running an ethical pitch process. The outcome of this was that the marketing director who called the pitch was fired, and a new marketing director appointed, and the pitch process ran with this third party quite happily. And we won, so it was great.
Thank you very much.
Winners agreement.
We've got to move on to the next topic, so I'm going to ask people to vote. Okay, is this behaviour acceptable or is it unacceptable? So that's pretty unanimous again. We're all very good. Okay, moving on to the final scenario. It's a juicy one.
Okay.
Nothing to do with
juicy or salacious. It's the pillow promotion. So senior male marketer, and already people are thinking Weinstein-like things, but marketer and their agency account director commenced a consensual sexual relationship. Immediately, the agency managed to increase the amount of work they did for the client, so everyone on the agency and clients, or the agency was happy, and everyone knew about the relationship, and yet they never directly discussed it. Until one day, the client decided to review the agency's relationship and put the account to pitch, where a competitive and larger agency was successful in winning the business. Now, the issue is, within a week of the account being awarded, the agency account director resigned to commence the new job as head of client services at the new agency on a significantly increased salary. So is this acceptable or not? With talent retention being such an issue with agencies,
Absolutely.
I'm wondering if there's a strategy, Susanna, for keeping your staff, or do they go with the client?
Well, I think it's actually quite a common thing that account lead goes with and piece of business sometimes, right? Because it's about understanding of the brand, understanding of the client, and et cetera, and et cetera. But I'll be curious to also know about the timeline of this. Is it immediately, or is it like premeditated? That would be where the big question was. Was there a discussion between the account director and the new agency during this pitch, or was there any side conversations between the agency? Okay. Whichever agency, and the client said, well, if we win this business, we will pull that account director over. So it depends.
That's right.
It's very...
There's some unknowns, but it's the way it appears.
The way it appears, then the way it's written, it seems like the account director has managed to get himself a pretty good job during a pitch process, which is obviously unacceptable.
Because Virginia, one of the things from a marketing, as a marketer, is that you really are buying a team of people at the agency, so those relationships are important. Maybe not as deep and personal as this, but certainly relationships are important.
Well, what if they break up? That's the risk.
Right. That's the big risk.
I think what jumps out would be everyone on both the agency and the client side accepted the relationship. I mean, certainly somebody more senior, or should have said something on whether privately to both, because what if they break up? I mean, it's wonderful when all the work, when everything is nice and loving and wonderful and work gets done faster. It's fine.
24 hours.
But just on that point, I wouldn't mind testing the audience for stereotypical thinking. How many people, when they saw this, thought that this was a male-female relationship? So it's okay, because it's not. It's actually a same-sex relationship, which in some ways made the whole thing more awkward, because while people sort of accepted it, they didn't want to criticise it for fear of being seen as being politically incorrect. That somehow they were making a judgment about the relationship because it was a same-sex relationship.
I think it doesn't matter whether it's a male-female or,
I just wanted to test the stereotypes.
So it's definitely a very westernized
We have to open this up because we're kind of running out of time. So just a couple of quick questions before we vote on this final scenario. Anybody got any comments they'd like to make on this little juicy issue?
In the new company, I think.
Is it so they live together happily ever after kind of end to the story? Do we know?
We'll have to get back to you because this only happened about 18 months ago, so I haven't checked.
Stay tuned.
Still quite a new one.
The story continues.
Okay, so let's have a vote then in terms of what do you think? Is this acceptable behaviour or is it unacceptable on behalf of the... So thumbs up, thumbs down. Sure. Let's have a vote. So I'm seeing mostly up, mostly up. There's a few abstainers, but people think it's acceptable behaviour.
Acceptable.
Okay. Thank you. So basically, just to sum up, from the five scenarios, the first four all came across as being pretty much unacceptable behaviour, and that was pretty unanimous in terms of how you all felt about it. And it's only the last one where the heartstrings were being tugged, there was a chance of love, potentially enduring love, that it was deemed to be acceptable. So it just shows. It's a bit like the presentation earlier on today. When you bring human emotion into it, it kind of makes things a little bit better. When it's just brutal dishonesty, then it's just totally unacceptable. I'd like to say thank you very much to the panel for tackling the tough questions from Darren and being prodded and prodded. And also for yourselves, thank you very much for engaging in this session. Thank you.